welcome school education faculty, students, guests, school teachers, leaders, and others in the community. I'm Kevin Basmajian, Interim Dean of the School of Education, and I'm here to introduce Dr. Morrell, Ernest Morrell. We're honored to welcome Dr. Morrell. He is he's an English education professor at Teachers College, Columbia University. He is also the director of the Institute for Urban and Minority Education there. And he's worn many hats over his professional career. Among them, researcher, teacher, editor, critical pedagogue, activist. But he also currently serves as vice president of National Council of Teachers of English, and next year will become the president-elect of the NCTE, which is the governing body for English teachers, for those who don't know. But as he writes on his own website, he is most proud of the fact that he is a writer. That's who he is more than anything. As he writes on his own website, words are power and freedom. They are the source of revolutions, personal and societal. Those who have command of the language have more might than those of the command armies. Words define meaning. Words influence thought. They are the manifestation of being and becoming. So given these views and perspectives, it's probably not surprising that Dr. Morrell has published 4 books. He has 5 currently under contract that he's working on. He's written over 50 articles and essays just in the past decade or so. So he's been pretty busy. But there's one theme or purpose that really weaves through all of his work, and that is a commitment to social justice and educational equity. And it's part of the reason he agreed to come and speak with us tonight, as that being a mission and purpose of our School of Education as well. So I'm very excited, and I think there's probably 2 more hats that he's worn that were important for me personally, which was advisor and mentor, as Dr. Morrell served on my dissertation committee at Michigan State University and really helped me to understand what it means to contribute to the broader educational arena. So I'm really excited on a personal level, and I'm very excited for all of you to have him, and I welcome Dr. Morrell to our school.
Thank you. Okay. All right, so is there anything I need to do? I'm looking for the person with the sound. Is that just for your, so it's not going to amplify me? All right, that's fine. Is this loud enough? Can you hear me in the back? All right, great. So I realized when I was sitting back there that I didn't write these very big, but if you are tweeting, my handle's just at Ernest Morrell. Another one, Kevin, Professor Basmajian, mentioned that I direct an institute at Columbia. So this is the handle for that. It's at IUMETC Columbia. If you want to also follow that or tweet that, it's a lot of the projects that I talk about are connected to that. And then the easiest email for me is just my name at gmail.com. The hashtag for this will be about powerful teaching. It's always a pleasure to come and talk to those that are going to be teachers and those that are teachers. I was able to talk to some of you this afternoon, but a little bit about myself. This is my 21st year teaching, and I've taught everything from junior high school up through graduate school. I'm also married to a teacher who's in her 20th year teaching. My parents have just entered their 45th and 47th years of teaching. And my father-in-law taught for 40 years before retiring. So teaching is not just what I do, it's who I am. And I think that there are a lot of messages about teaching and being a teacher that can be overwhelming or negative. But one thing that has been true for my life is that every day I've been thankful for what I do. And I want to talk to people that are going into the profession, share a little bit of my story and things that we've done, but also to continue to cultivate that love, that passion for teaching, because it really is a difference maker. I mean, teaching makes you eternal, right? The impact that you have on people never stops giving. My father, after 45 years, says he's still a dreamer, he's still optimistic, and we need that, right? The students that you'll teach, those that are here, those that haven't even been born yet, right? Their future is in some ways in your hands. So it's important to kind of treasure that, and at the same time, it's important to prepare yourselves for that, because it makes a real difference how you prepare to teach. What skill sets you bring, but also what mindsets you bring, what attitudes you bring, what perspectives you bring. They make a difference on whether kids learn and how they learn. So the topic, is powerful teaching. I really want to focus on that, and I want us to think about what powerful teaching means in this moment, right? It's 2012, and that's important for some of the slides I'm going to show. You think about the average life expectancy now is 80 years, but for those that are born, it's closer to 90, 95, even 100 years. The kids that are entering school right now are likely to see the 22nd century. Right? You think about what kind of teaching they need. I have a son who turned 1 year old on Sunday. When he's my age, it'll be the year 2052. Right? So that's just the context for you to think about all the values and beliefs you bring to the profession and what kind of world that teaching prepared you for and what kind of world we need to prepare students for. So I'll have images throughout, and you can look on the slides, and most of the images involve kids is part of what my theory of what learning needs to look like and what the classroom needs to look like. So you can continue to look at those because they're not necessarily the kind of images that people associate with classroom life, but they are the kind of images that we have to associate with powerful teaching. Right? So if we think about where we're headed, it's 2012, almost 2013. We've got kindergartners who will retire from working in the year 2075 or so. Right? And they're coming into your classrooms. So let's start here. This is an American factory about 100 years ago, 1910 or so. What does it look like?
Textile.
What's that?
Textile.
Textile, they're sewing. What other institution does it look like that you may have spent some time in? It's a classroom, right? If I show it to children, they think it's a classroom. Like, that's a classroom. When you think about why classes are arranged in rows, why there are desks, why it's natural for you to put your head down, or I hear one teacher in a particular school I work, she's always talking about slants, being slants, so it's the kids with kind of their heads down. Not looking up, not making eye contact, not speaking unless spoken to. When you think about why there are bells to release a class between periods, has anyone ever thought about that? Why are there bells to release a class between periods? See, it's happened so long because the bells release people in factories. That American schools in the industrial era were created to prepare people for this world. Before that, most people didn't need school. They just worked on farms. They didn't need to be literate. So I asked my middle son, who's 8 years old, about 6 weeks into his schooling, what do you think it takes to be a good student? Right, he's 5 years old. He spent about 6 weeks in school. What are some of the things you think he said? Listen to the teacher. What else?
Raise your hand.
Raise your hand. What else? Be quiet. What's that?
Stay angry.
That's right. Exactly, right? Don't gonna get moved to red or check marks or whatever. He said, don't make eye contact. Don't be eyeballing that teacher, right? Don't look her in the eye. Stay out of trouble. Don't speak unless you're spoken to. And so, where does that come from? It comes from this, right? Which is fine, I guess, if my 7-year-old son is going to exist in a world where those kinds of talents are actually rewarded. And they're not. Right? If you think about sewing in a sewing factory, then it may be good to keep your head down, to speak when spoken to be silent. But if you think about what skills people need even at the beginning of the 21st century, and this is the correlation between these two slides, right? You can see the similarities. It's where it comes from. It's not a coincidence. But if we think about the world where we're headed, right? This is the early 21st century, not even the middle 21st century. We have no idea what it's going to look like in 2052. But we know it's not going to go backwards to, sewing machines nailed to a wooden floor and keeping your head down for 8 hours. What are some of the differences here in what's required of you to be proficient in the world of work in the 21st century? Yes?
Collaboration.
Collaboration, right? So you have to look at someone. You have to be able to speak to somebody. What else?
Communication.
Communication, right? So it's not just an essay that you hand to a teacher. You may actually have to talk to somebody. What other differences do you notice about this picture than the first one I showed of the sewing factory? Technology, right? So they're all mediated by some kind of technology, a computer. Most of them, it's computers. But now we would have mobile media devices. We would have tablets, all sorts of other kinds of technology that mediate them. What else do you see that's different? Diversity. So there's gender diversity, there's age diversity, there's ethnic diversity. So if you're going to get on in the world of work, you have to be able to deal with people that may be different from you, may have a different background than you. And there's one other thing that kids always point out. Yes?
Well, there's the mom, I think, working from home, so it kind of has to do with like being versatile, that you're not just supposed to work in classroom.
Yeah, that there's multiple settings where work is happening, and it's not just one kind of factory we're preparing people for. Yes? Yeah, the kids point to that first. They're like, they're happy, right? They're engaged. Right? That you would get in trouble for having that expression on your face in most classes, right? Or standing up or walking around. So we have to begin to correlate the kinds of things we do in school with what we know makes you successful in the world. Someone who is silent, who does not have a command of her own voice, who does not know how to collaborate or get on with others is not very employable at the beginning of the 21st century, let alone the mid-century. So powerful teaching has to begin with some kind of aesthetic for what powerful learning looks like for the life that we're trying to prepare people for, right? So the shushing and the sitting there and the seat work and the kinds of things that have become tradition are in large part no longer valuable. I was giving this talk a few weeks ago. It was in Minneapolis, and we were in a warehouse where there was a lot of wholesaling. So all the walls were windows. And all around us, it was during the day, it was teachers, and we saw people at work. And it was interesting because everything we saw looked like this. They were around tables, they had technology, they didn't have to sit in their seats, they were getting up and gesturing, and one of the teachers pointed out, like, so look, we can see what people look like at work. Right? So what are we doing? Right? If the goal is to actually prepare kids for this kind of a universe, what are we doing? And what do we need to do? And that's important when you think about powerful teaching, right? Think about where our students are headed or where we'd like them to be headed. So when we think about powerful teaching, creating 21st century learning communities, this was a test I did with my students. This is about a year old, but we Googled American classrooms in the 21st century. We just Googled American classroom, and that was the image we got on the right. But what has changed? One picture's in color, one's in black and white, right? You think? Now think about how the world has changed in that 100-year interim. Right? So we've got to give ourselves permission to think differently. We want to have some kind of different results. Some people talk about the logic of kids resisting in classrooms. They're resisting what they have a sense of is irrelevant to how they learn and how they're going to need to demonstrate how they learn. So a 21st century learning community is an important part about powerful teaching, because you can't disconnect powerful teaching from powerful learning. And that's a point that I'll come back to, right? Powerful teaching is connected to powerful learning. So the question really is, how do kids learn powerfully? Maybe that's a part of it, but maybe there's something else to it. But if you're going to be successful, you have to create environments where kids are learning powerfully. And I'll share a few of those with you tonight. So this is a young girl who's about the same age as my son. And he does the same thing with iPads. And he can swipe through, I have maybe 100 apps on my iPad. He knows how to turn it on, swipe through the iPads and identify his favorite apps, turn the apps on and play with them. He just turned one. Right? He never accidentally hits one of my apps. He's not interested in the Wall Street Journal. He's interested in Subway Surfer or Word Bingo, and he can identify those. Right? He's 1 year old. She's about 1.5 years. Right? If we thought about it, what kind of education does she need? Right? That you might see this child or a child like this. What does she need from us? What does she need in her education? Yes, sir. Okay, so she needs access to some kind of technology. Education is always mediated by technology. You all have a technology in front of you. Some it's a pen and paper, right? Some it's a mobile phone. Some it's a laptop. So technology is not the enemy. Technology just means the tools that you use at your disposal. But those tools are changing, right? So she may need access to different tools from us than just a pencil and paper. What else might she need in her education? Teacher, right? She needs someone that reaches her, that makes a real connection with her, and that tells her that she's capable of excellence and fosters that love of learning. What else might she need? Yep, right here. Yeah.
Physical interactions.
Okay, so she needs interaction, right? She needs to be able to connect with people. As people were saying before, how to collaborate, how to talk to others, how to work in groups, right? We can think about a lot of other things, but education is only as powerful as us beginning with the consumer of it, not with a standards document, not with a policy document, not with a set of norms, not with traditions, not with this is the way it was like when I went to school in 1972, but with one question. What does she need from us, right? What do my students need from me? There's a difference between what I have been trained to give them and what they need, right? That we start differently. I was applying for my teacher education program. I kept talking about teaching English, teaching English, teaching English, and finally the person interviewing me stopped me and she said, "You do not teach English. You teach students." And that had a real impact on my life because I was thinking, oh, I'm teaching this content area. I read Shakespeare, I already know it. But if I'm teaching students, then I have to start with who they are, where they come from, what makes them tick. And so I can never be comfortable because they've changed in 20 years. And what the students needed from me in 1991 when I started teaching is not what they need in 2012. What the students I encounter in New Jersey need is not the same as the students in California needed. Right? What the students in first period need is not the same as the students in second period. And what different students in first period need is different. So if I start with what kind of education do they need, it means a whole different kind of approach to teaching powerfully. One of the things that we know that's important about teaching is that we need to cultivate young people's voices. Whether that's through writing, whether it's through speaking, whether it's through multimodal means. How do we cultivate their voices? How do we help them to say what they would like to say better? Right? That's important. So part of it is the motivation, like having something to say. Right? I haven't met a kid yet who doesn't have something to say. We learn language by definition because we have something we want to say. But knowing how to say it and feeling good about your ability to say it are two of the biggest challenges we have in education. Right? One of the things that I learned from my parents, who I told you were lifelong educators, is that more than having an ability crisis in American schools, we have an identity crisis. We don't have kids who can't do it. We have kids who think they can't do it. And so part of the biggest challenge is dealing with that perceived deficit. What is it about the education experience? And someone else who was an educator that I really admired said, no kid comes into kindergarten expecting to be a failure at school. That is taught to them. The failure is taught to them. They probably come to school seeing themselves as pretty competent individuals because 99.99% of them have been very successful at learning culture. They've learned all the things that they wanted to. They tie their shoes, they know language, they know the block, they know the people in their family, they know how to play certain games, they know songs at church. So they come seeing themselves as successful, and the failure is taught. So if we want students to have a positive identity, feeling good about their ability to do the kinds of things we want them to do, we have to give them that identity in school. But they don't come to school with these preformed identities as failure because most people don't flunk at culture. Right? Most people are A students at learning culture. You find very few that come that haven't figured out how to get on in their family, how to get on in their block, how to get on in the playground, how to get on at church, and how to get on at family occasions. It's in school. It's one of the few cultures where it's okay for a majority of people to fail. So how do we do that? Cultivate their voice, their ability to do it, their identity about it. How do we help them to say things with authority and power? And how do we help them to use their voice to work for change? Right? I've done projects with kids from kindergarten all the way up through college. I ask them one question, say, if you could change the world, what would you do? Right? And I haven't met the kids who have no ideas for how they want to do that, how they want to work together, whether it's creating a recycling program at their elementary school, or getting a playground, or a skateboard park, or whatever it is. How can I center the learning activity and helping them do something they want to do and work together for change? Right? That's an important part of what we do. That's an important part about powerful teaching, is actually cultivating that voice. So here's a couple of background slides that are very important to thinking about why kids don't learn. Another thing I've learned from educators I admire is we have to understand the logic of failure. Right? Don't see failure as pathological, but it's logical. Why is it logical that kids who show up at 5 years old with their shiny lunch pail with dreams of making you happy end up wanting to run out of the building 8 years later? What's the logic behind that? Not what's wrong with the students, but what makes their actions logical. This is one of those theories that kind of points to that really just transformed my world. I was about your age when I encountered this. And it's the expectancy value theory of achievement motivation. It basically says motivation to achieve is the function of two characteristics. If these are met, you're likely to be motivated. If they're not met, you won't be. The first one is the expectation of success. All right? If you do not expect to be successful at the task that you're asked to do, there is no way you can be motivated to do it. So it doesn't matter, right? I say it to you once, and then I yell, and I make you put your head down. I call your mom. I make you put your head in the corner. I ridicule you in front of all of your friends. If you do not expect success, you will not be motivated to succeed. Saying it louder and more emphatically does not help if you feel like you're going to fail. So there's a logic to kids being not motivated because they think they're going to fail at what you're asking them to do. It's not that they don't think that it's a smart or good thing to do. They just don't think they can do it. So instead of saying it louder, say, how can I help you to be successful at this? And see how they change. Right? I mean, it's like night and day. The second is value, right? That to the extent that the task is relevant to you, you'll be motivated to do it. Right? How many people have younger siblings, cousins, neighbors that you've seen with the iPad or technology? Right? How many of them, keep your hands up, have failed to learn how to use that technology? Of course they learn how to do it, right? Of course because it's relevant to them. Or the 16-year-old that says, you know what, take the keys back, Dad, I cannot figure out how to drive this car. No, right? That does not happen. And some of these activities we know are as cognitively sophisticated as school activities. So this hit me like a ton of bricks. At 24 years old, which I felt like was the longest year of my life because I felt like I was failing miserably at educating kids that I loved. And I took that very personally, right? And I could not sleep, and I could not eat, and I dreaded going to school to teach because I felt like a failure. I was taking this class and reading about this theory, and I said, there's a logic to why I'm failing these kids. I'm asking them to do things that they don't feel they can be successful at, and I'm asking them to do things that I haven't made relevant to their lives. And we changed that, right? I mean, we changed it. In the 6 years in the project that I worked, in the school that I worked in Northern California, we had a 95% high school graduation rate and a 95% college going rate. And I coached a basketball team of girls, and every single girl who went to that program went to college. You know, some of them are judges and engineers and PhD students and lawyers now. And they were also one of the top 25 teams in the country. It changed. We directed a program at UCLA for 12 years, 100% graduation rate, 100% college going rate. Same kids. They didn't change. What changed? Me. That's why I believe in the power of teaching. The students were the same that were failing in 1993, that were like on the New York Times in 1994. The same kids, the same family, the same neighborhood, the same poverty, the same ethnic demographics. The difference was the teacher who figured out that there's a logic to why they're not succeeding. It's not because they're disengaged or they're broken homes or whatever it is. It was because we were not motivating them, not giving them pathways to success, and not making things relevant. Those are important things to remember when you think about, like, Why are kids not giving me what I want them to give me? It probably boils down to some version of one of these two things. It's not happening. Okay. The second major issue when you think about social justice and education as a social context is the importance of attachment. Now, many of you might have taken psychology classes or other places where you come across attachment theory. And part of attachment theory, there was research done. I read it when I was in college. It was right after the fall of the Soviet Union. And there were kids who were being adopted in the United States that had grown up in or spent part of their early years in orphanages in the Soviet Union. And they had been taken care of. I mean, they were fed, they were clothed, they weren't abused. But they were having delayed development when they came to the United States, right? If they were clothed and fed and housed, why do you think they were not developing in the same way as other kids? Anyone venture a guess? Lack of interaction, lack of a connection to a caregiver. No one was holding them or playing with them or telling them that they loved them. And so the kids were not forming attachments. And this research has been done over and over again in different kinds of contexts for almost 60 years now. If you do not have secure attachments, your development becomes hampered. Well, guess what? It's the same thing in school, right? People familiar with the dropout literature? If you're connected to 2 adults on campus, the likelihood that you drop out drops down to nil. It's not grades, right, or test scores, or perceived ability. It's connection. If I am connected to people on this campus, if I feel an attachment, then my academic development is likely to be healthier. So part of powerful teaching means developing these attachments. How do I get kids attached to the academic world? That they like school, right? That's not an oxymoron to like school, right? That it can be fun. You know, I had a brother who hated school, and we shared a bedroom, and he was in the 1st grade, I was in the 6th grade, and he would start crying every morning because he hated school that much. Because people told him that he was not smart there. And people told him that he couldn't learn there, and that he couldn't read there, and he failed all of their tests. And he was over in a group by himself, and he would cry, and my parents would have to force him to get dressed every day. There's not a day in my life as an educator where I don't think about my brother, who, by the way, handles IPOs for a major corporation now. But he hated school. He made no attachment to that world. The second is attachment to the world of, literature or art or math. Attachments to others in my classroom. I feel like a community. I feel like if I was absent a day that they would miss me. And attachments to the larger social world. Like, it's not just about me. Me becoming educated makes me a better contributor to a world that I want to change. It makes me a better participant in my family and community. Right? There's a lot of evidence, a lot of scholarship, and for me, a lot of personal testimony that when we begin to focus on things like motivation and attachment, all of a sudden, bad students get their heads off the desk. And the homework basket becomes full. And kids stay after school. And the difference in schools that are failing and schools that are succeeding, classrooms that are disengaged and classrooms that are engaged when they have the exact same curriculum. How many of you are observing in schools? How many of you have seen teachers teaching the same curriculum with some students that are engaged and some students that aren't engaged? Right? It's not the curriculum. All right, we spend all this time in colleges of education saying the curriculum's going to make the difference. They all have the same book that they're teaching, of mice and men or polynomials or graphing sentences. In the one classroom, there's giggling and people are coming around, they're happy. In the other classroom, yelling at people trying to bolt out the door. Difference is in the teaching. Difference is if the students feel like they're going to be successful, if there's meaningful attachments made. I'm not saying don't spend time developing curriculum, but curriculum is not going to save your teaching life. It's how you connect with kids, right? The central question has been the same. How do I get kids excited about learning? Right? The people who are answering that question successfully are doing a much better job. I work in schools all across America, and I watch co-planning happen, and I know everyone has left that room with the same curriculum. I also know that they have pretty much a random selection of students. If there's 5 teachers, I see 5 different outcomes. Well, if the students are the same, and the curriculum is the same. The difference is in how they're fostering that classroom community. So it's really important to think about how do I spend some time doing those sorts of things, making sure students feel attached. Okay. Now if we shift for a moment to how kids learn, and thinking again about powerful teaching as being a result of powerful learning, what are some of the things that you see that are common to each of these pictures? I told you I was going to show you a lot of images about how kids learn. But what's common across these images, or what are some of the things you notice that are elements of how kids are learning? Yes? Yeah, I got you, and then we'll go back there. Yep.
They're all collaborating with one another.
Okay, they're collaborating with one another? Yes, sir. They're doing something. Yes. Other things that you notice from the pictures? Yes?
There's something visual that they're looking at.
Okay, something visual that they're looking at. Yes?
They're all engaged.
They're engaged. Anything else? Okay. Here's something to try on for size. From the learning sciences, which is one of my areas. In pretty much every learning environment but schools, learning happens in the exact same way. Think about that, right? In almost every other environment, learning happens in the same way. What you described, collaboration. How do I learn to ride a bike? How do I learn to cook? How do I learn to play this video game? How do I learn to play the piano? How do I learn the dance move? How do I learn how to program my computer? There's someone who knows what's going on, who shows you, who allows you to play around with it, right? The same way they learn soccer or the same way that they're learning these other kinds of things. So one of the things that we've been trying to do in school for the past 20 years is think about if there's something to all these different learning environments that's exactly the same, maybe we should start to do that more in the classroom, right? To have more engagement, to have students learning by doing, to have learning through play, to have students teaching each other, right? There's so many very sophisticated things that students learn. It doesn't mean that there's not a role for teaching, but it just means that teaching looks differently, right? This is not about a teacherless world. It's about teachers having different kinds of responsibilities in the classroom if this is how learning happens. There's still probably a coach. There's still probably someone directing that. But maybe I'm directing activities where students are connecting to each other. But it's important to have a theory of learning. Every theory of teaching is supported by a theory of learning. You may not articulate that theory of learning, but if I'm going to talk to students and then they're going to respond and tell me what I told them, that's a certain theory of learning. If I'm going to give them an activity and let them work on it and play together and build something, and then I'm going to ask them critical questions and give them feedback, and then they're going to give each other feedback and have a conversation about it, that's a different theory of learning. But it's important to connect those theories of learning to how learning happens in the world outside of classrooms, right? So all of this comes together, right, with a theory that has informed a lot of the teaching that I've seen where teachers are making a big difference. I have the privilege of working with, I think, some of the most amazing teachers in the country. Teachers that are achieving excellence every single day, regardless of the background of the school or where the students are, where the students have fun, where the teachers have fun. And someone asked me once to boil that down to, what is it? Right? I think part of the missing story in America is that we don't talk enough about these amazing, excellent teachers that are out there and the work that they're doing. Right? Well, I see them. And these are some of the things, right? Part of it is voice. They're all helping young people to say or do something that the young people want to say or do in the context of the discipline. Whether that's history or social studies or language or math or science or English. The second is they're building on students' confidence and making it relevant to their lives. Affirmation, right? Adults need affirmation. I was in an award ceremony for an event we hosted, and Bishop Desmond Tutu won an award, and he spoke. And one of the other people who spoke and won an award was about between 80 and 90 years old, and he'd been an educator his whole adult life. And he said, if you give an adult affirmation, what do? He says, if that person could be 65 years old, if you give them affirmation, they're going to go home and tell their mom. They're going to tell their wife and kids. It's like, think about how much, if we need that affirmation, how much do kids need that affirmation? Just how excited are you going to be if you get smashed every day in school? So I find teachers who can affirm kids while they're learning. They're not perfect. We can't wait until they're perfect before we affirm them, or else we'll never be affirming them. If all of our feedback is negative and do this and it's red and I can't believe you did this, and that's hard for 20-something, 30-something, 40-something-year-old adults. How hard is that for an 8-year-old? Like, no wonder they get fidgety, right, and want to run out of your classroom. Push students beyond their expectations of themselves. Every student has a definition of excellence. I learned that from watching a state champion cross-country coach. Part of what I do is coach. He took a little tiny school. They won the California State Championship. We have 6 million students in California. His little tiny school in the desert was the fastest school in the state. And he said, how did you do it? He said, every kid has a definition of excellence. Right? Your definition of excellence is not her definition of excellence. But you have a definition of excellence. And if you don't achieve it, I'm going to say, I know you can do better. Right? Do you better. Don't worry about her. Every student can achieve. All right? That's not defined externally. As a teacher, you develop that with students. Every student can achieve. If you can't achieve, what's your motivation? Right? Think about it. We tell half the students, you're not going to achieve. What's their motivation? To behave, to get on. It's just threats. So great teachers have every student pushing themselves to exceed their best. Purpose. That students have a purpose. And that students have an ability to make a difference in the lives of others. And that they're allowed to share their passion and their desire with the world. Right? These are basic principles that I see when I look at classrooms that are the kind of classrooms we want to put our kids in. They're the kind of classrooms where we want to do our student teaching in. And the kind of classrooms where parents can't gush enough and they thank you and say, thank you for what you're doing for my kid. They're honoring students' voice, they're affirming students. Every student has a sense of how far they can be pushed. And students want us to be hard on them. They just want us to be fair and give them a chance to succeed. Those have to go hand in hand. So how does all of this kind of translate, into some of the things that we might see when we think about powerful teaching in the 21st century? I'm just going to share a couple of examples of ways that we've done this. You're probably young enough that you can associate with some of this. Any Subway Surfer players in here? Only one now. I don't believe that. I don't believe that. Even my mom plays Subway Surfers, and my sons. But these kinds of things engage our young people, right? I show this to, most of that's kind of more the middle school, but they start jumping up. They get excited about these kinds of things. One thing I learned early in my teaching career was that if the students are excited about it, I need to figure out a way to use it to connect it to what I'd like to do because I want them to be excited. The other thing I learned is that a lot of the kinds of skills we want to teach students are being learned as they engage with these various forms of culture. And so how do we bring youth culture into our classrooms? How do we connect youth culture to the standards? How do we use it to increase motivation? And how do we use it to increase achievement? Are questions that I've been asking for the 21 years that I've been an educator. But I know in my heart of hearts there's something about Phineas and Ferb. That's the one in the top middle for those that are out of this loop. There's something about Phineas and Ferb that's going to bring a smile to one of my students' faces, but there's also something about understanding Phineas and Ferb that's going to develop some important intellectual skills. Or reading about lacrosse, or listening to music, having conversations about some of these magazine covers. The other thing that we know about youth popular culture is that while there's the excitement level, there's also the danger level. Right? For kids' inability to critically engage these images, they can do very damaging things to themselves. Right? We know as young as 5th grade that girls are starving themselves for more than 24 hours because they're concerned about their body image. And we know, at least in the schools where I work, kids are killing each other. So if we don't engage youth culture and one, tap into it and its possibilities, but also help kids to be more critical about it, this is a matter of life and death. Right? I mean, I have buried too many children over their inability to critically engage these images. And having that happen as an educator led me to believe this is as important as anything that I do because it's tied to their identity. right? That there's a lot that comes through the media that's trying to shape a certain kind of identity that's meant to build a consumer. But it's not necessarily good for kids. So part of helping to have powerful teaching is help students feel better about themselves. One of the reasons they don't feel great about themselves is because no one helps them interpret some of these images that they get through the media. Very few kids fit on the covers of Teen Vogue or Cosmo Girl, but a lot of them want to and feel inferior if they don't. So we think about these questions we begin with. How are students using popular culture? What do they consume? What do they create? What academic skills are they developing? And how can we connect it? And we find that we can connect it across age groups. We can connect it across subject matter. We increase engagement. We increase relevance. We increase the possibility of success because we're tapping into things kids already feel confident in being able to do. At the same time, we're able to have critical conversations about how media shapes kids' identities in positive and negative ways. So a couple of ideas that this builds on. I won't talk a lot about this, but someone you might look up, Paulo Freire, who is a really powerful educator, he says, true education must begin with the experiences of the people. Right? To make it truly valuable, we have to start with who the kids are and where they are. Another one, who's a colleague of mine, is Gloria Latson-Billings, talks about culturally relevant teaching. That education, at least part of it, has to help students develop and or maintain some cultural competence. That is important to have a firm belief of who you are. As one of my students said, how can I love learning if you're teaching me to hate the language my mother tells me she loves me in? I gotta say that again. Right? How can I respect you and love learning if you're teaching me to hate the language my mother tells me she loves me in? And I said, who's doing that? Right? We're not saying hate your language, hate your home life, but if part of education isn't helping you maintain some kind of sense of cultural competence, that's what's happening. As a matter of fact, as a graduate student, I did not believe that I had language. The first time I learned that what African Americans spoke was actually a language, I was 23 years old and almost at my master's degree. And I almost broke down in tears. And it hadn't occurred to me that I spent most of my life believing that we did not have language. We spoke a broken language. And I remember it was on a Friday. I drove home and I told my brothers who were 15 and 16, guess what? We have a language. Like, no, we don't. We don't have a language. We speak ghetto. We speak broken English. And I almost broke down in tears again because they were having trouble in school. And it dawned upon me that it comes at a cost, right? If you're not continually affirmed, then that can be disaffirming. It's not that anyone necessarily ever said that or came out and disaffirmed, but the lack of any association of who you are, who you were with excellence means disaffirmation by definition. The absence of affirmation is disaffirmation. So that was something that it took me as a graduate student to think about and then to do that with my kids, right? That maintaining cultural confidence, being affirmed in who you are inside and outside of school is an important part of making education relevant. Okay, so things we know about popular culture that, this is in the standards. That kids need to be able to look at different formats. They need to be able to look at the media. They need to be able to produce in different kinds of media. And they need to be able to distribute through the media. Right? So this isn't even something that's alien anymore. That it's a key part of the standards now that kids are going to have to be able to read, write, and produce and distribute information via the media. Okay. So here's a couple of examples of what that looks like. One of the things that we do to connect to young people is use sports as a way to promote literacy, whether it's numeracy, whether it's history, whether it's science and the physics of sports. How many people have seen like the science of sports on ESPN? There's a couple people. My sons are totally into that. Right? They will sit down and watch someone talk about science, and if it's Calvin Johnson's 45-inch vertical leap, and they're like, wow, how can they measure that? Or how fast a lacrosse shot goes. Early in my career, I worked a lot with athletes. I was a college athlete. And I worked with athletes that were failing in school. I could not believe that anybody who was smart enough to be a great athlete could actually fail in school. But there weren't the connections made. So we started immediately kind of connecting, and this was mostly a project with boys, connecting their love of sports to learning literacy, bringing in certain kind of readings, letting them use their knowledge of sports to learn about science or math, or learning about history and other culture through sports. So it's become a really powerful way to kind of make those connections. And we were able to have a lot of success with the boys because we began to map their intellectual identity on with their athletic identity. Because most kids who play sports are readers, right? You give them, magazines or football cards or other things that are connected to sports, and they'll read it. So one of the things we have to think about is, why do we keep the things that kids like to read and learn about out of the classroom? Because it's not that it's not academic, it just isn't tradition. Other ways that we use popular culture in the classroom is having young people create plays. Right? This is an example of elementary kids that we worked with in Southern California who ended up mastering math and English and having very high test scores, the highest test scores in their sub-district for many years running. And we created this curriculum around art for change, asking kids about issues that they cared about. This one particularly was violence. They lived in a neighborhood that had a great amount of violence. So they ended up doing things like reading police reports, looking at statistical databases. These are fourth graders, and so they knew how to go on to censusfactfinder.gov and find poverty rates and other rates for their zip code. We did get information from the police department. They learned how to conduct surveys. They learned how to conduct interviews, do neighborhood walks, all in the context of writing plays. They were advocating for an end to a culture in their school that permeated violence. And these kids traveled around, performed their plays. We brought them to the university. They became very excited about learning and reading and writing because we had a whole curriculum that was interdisciplinary, that was centered around an issue that they cared about. And we've done a lot of that work. We continue to do that work in Harlem. We do that work in New Jersey. We do that work in Los Angeles. We do that work in Indiana, asking kids, what is it that you care most about, and how would you like to change your community? Thinking about working with collaborative teams of teachers. How can we wrap that into our literacy curricula? How can we wrap that into our social studies curricula, our math, and our science? But it starts at a different place with kind of connecting to their thoughts about what they want to change, but also the ways that they like to communicate, like writing plays or slamming poems or creating PowerPoint slides or putting together digital films, are all things that we allow young people to do. Mock trials, debates, Socratic conversation. We do a lot. And these are some of the students that I work with in New York. These are students from the Bronx and from Brooklyn that we work with them in their classrooms. But these kids, we pulled out, we gave them nothing. No pay, no college credit. They came to the university every day during the summer, their own summer, from 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock to learn about philosophy and history because they were learning how to debate. And this particular team of folks and the students they represent ended up in the New York State Championships, taking 16 of the top 20 places in the state this year. And traveling around the country. And what we did was we allowed them to argue. And they chose the issues that they cared about and wanted to debate. And we brought their teachers. Teachers brought this back into their English classes and their history classes. This is students during that summer in school, for no credit, staying all day, and as a matter of fact, getting kicked out of the university 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night each day because they wanted to stay. And I think that part of the problem we have in education is we need to change how we think about these kids. Right? We just ask them a different question, and you get different kinds of results. So having kids involved in talking and debating and developing these kinds of 21st century skills is important. This is another slide where some of the work that we have students writing legal briefs and well down into upper elementary, middle school, not just the high school where we have kids doing this kind of stuff. We do a lot of work with hip hop, critical poetry, having kids slam, join slam teams. We have a group of young people that call themselves the digital advocates, and they're making films and writing poems and plays and blogs and websites and doing digital advocacy via social media sites, all for issues that they care about. We have a group that's in a housing project in Upper Manhattan, and they decided in their after school, we work with them during school, to create their own community newsletter and to share that. And they brought their parents in. It was about 8 o'clock at night, like this late at night. And they wanted to bring their parents and get their parents excited about developing a community newsletter. Right? These are the kinds of things that happen. You begin to connect with young people, and this, we're bringing that into the classroom. And now teachers in their classes are having students develop community newsletters and having students contribute to it. One of the schools I work at in New Jersey, in Orange, they have their own internal social media site in the school where the kids have pages like Facebook, and they're connecting to each other, and they're taking the best of what's produced in there and kind of putting it out for the world to see in a community blog. These are some examples of some of the poems that the students wrote. And I have some examples on YouTube. If you email me, and I'll show you what it looks like, some of the students are doing this kind of work. We had a conference a few weeks ago. We brought 600 people to Columbia University, and the kids were slamming their poems, and we videotaped it, and so some of that's on YouTube now, just what kind of work kids can do. These are a couple of slides from the media literacy stuff that we do. We ask kids these kind of questions. What does it mean to be normal or cool or have power in an advertisement or image? We have students look at images like this. Right? So if you think about this, these images, how many images like this do kids see during their formative years? Millions, right? Thousands today. So when I said that our boys and girls are literally dying over their inability to read these images, that's true. So we have kids kind of analyzing these. What does it mean to have power? What does it mean to be cool? What is it saying about what it means to be a young girl if you look at Hayden Panettiere? Or what does it mean to be a young boy if you look at Fiddy? How can I weave this into a curriculum that's for elementary school students, or for middle school students, or for high school students? Or how can I connect this to language arts? Or how could we do a social studies activity around the media and culture? How could we connect this to science? How could we connect it to math and look at statistics about how kids use the media? These are the kinds of things that we do when we're trying to connect to these images, right? But we also want to connect to these kinds of images, right? Because we don't often think about that image on the left as being relevant. So one of the things we have kids do is produce their own media. Right? We give them cameras. We create websites. If you don't like the way that young people are being portrayed in the world, portray them yourself. If you don't like the media that exists, create your own media. Right? And then we document the kinds of skills that young people are developing. That they're developing, first and foremost, a new identity, a sense of themselves as people that can produce something that matters. Second, they're developing a different relationship to the world, that attachment we talked about, that I'm the kind of person who's going to care about things. 3, they're developing a connection with the others that they're working with, that we work together on these kinds of issues. 4, they're developing a set of really competent academic skills that are going to make them different kinds of students, right? That is not this is not extra to school. This is actually the substance of what school should look like. So we have youth as media producers. The last thing that I'll just run through real quick is we do a lot of work having students as researchers, right? So you see some of these images of very young kids doing work with science or gardening. We also have them do social science research. We connect this across the subject areas. And I think that the Carl Sagan quote is true, that kids start out with this natural-born desire to be scientists. I can see that in my own 2nd grade son and my 7th grade son. I even see it in younger kids. We have them say, you're going to be scientists, you're going to be researchers. We send them out into the neighborhood, right? And the kind of excitement that they bring to that. We start with this question. These are, what the kids look like that we're doing work with. If you could change the world, what's one thing you would do? If you could change your community, what would you do? And how can we have that as the starting point for how we work together as a faculty? There's a lot in the Common Core. These are some of the other students that I've worked with that says that students are going to have to learn how to do the research. This is a particular project that we have in Harlem now, youth historians. I was talking to you about this earlier. So this is a project that we're doing now in the schools with social studies teachers, where the kids are actually collecting research in the neighborhood of Harlem and becoming historians. And the student who created this project, is probably 21 or 22 years old and says, I want to make a difference. I want kids to like history. I want them to be connected to the neighborhood. This is a kid from St. Louis, Missouri, right, who works in my institute. And after these kinds of conversations, like, I want to do something. So he got a grant from the provost. He hasn't even taught yet. And he created this project. He brought it to the principal of the school. Principal said, I want you to speak to the whole student body. October 10th, he went and spoke to the whole student body. And now we have to figure out how to get more people. He's got 4 or 5 people working for him. A couple of the teachers want to work for him. They're doing this project. One of the major museums in Harlem is going to house the kids and the work that they do. We're going to bring them to the university. And they're going to actually contribute to the community archives around history. What a way to get kids excited about history. What a way to get them excited about learning, develop academic skills. This is his website. So if you go to youthhistorians.com, you will find Barry Goldenberg, a 22, 23-year-old kid who's developed a project that I think is going to transform the neighborhood. And it's going to transform people's lives. And it's going to transform the way that they think about history. And it's going to transform their learning. This is another one that we did in the Critical Minds project. You can look at our youngcriticalminds.com site. And we just started by asking kids to write about their lives. And this work has taken off. We've done it in Boston. We've done it in New Jersey. We've done it in California. We've done it Northern California, Southern California, Tucson. And the kinds of things that kids begin to write and share about their lives. And then we use that as branches in other areas of inquiry. So they talk about sociology or history, quantitative data that helps explain their lives. One of the kids, I think I have here. This is a principal in Newark in a school where 90% of the kids are passing the state test in a school that was a failing school 4 or 5 years ago. And all the kids take this journey now to semester-long autoethnography where they're looking at their own lives, but it's interdisciplinary. They're connecting their lives to issues in sociology and history and math. One of the kids started with a question, why do so many people like me die at a young age? That became a project, an inquiry project. And he began looking at, like police records and jobless rates and created this whole project. And this is the principal, Raz Baraka. I know people know poetry. People know Amiri Baraka, the poet. Leroy Jones, lost poet. Somebody. Well, that's his son, Raz Baraka. But this is a school where kids are happy to be there. And they're learning. And you walk and you see projects on the walls. Right? And someone drops something, someone else picks it up. Someone bumps into you and says, sorry, sir, sorry, ma'am. Right? Kids hand in homework. And kids succeed. And guess what? It's in one of the most impoverished neighborhoods in Newark, New Jersey. That shouldn't matter. Right? One of the reasons that I have these kinds of conversations with educators is because I am enough of an optimist to think that race and class should not be predictors of academic success. That this can happen anywhere, right? You do these sorts of things. You tap into what makes kids excited. You make attachments to them. You connect it to the community. All of a sudden, you've got kids at a school I work in Brooklyn where 100% of the kids that graduated got accepted into colleges. And over 90% of the kids graduate. The teachers love being there. I just left. I was there yesterday. And they said, it's so much fun to be here. It's so much fun to do this work. They're achieving results. They're doing these same kinds of projects. This is another project we have that's in a school in Harlem where kids are making videos about issues in their neighborhood. They're looking at science issues, so we're connecting STEM learning to filmmaking. Kids are looking at health issues and asthma issues and food deserts, putting on film festivals. Right? The kids we got, the principal were like, these are 10 knuckleheads, right, in this program, and good luck with that. The end of the first semester of the project, the kids are showing up, dressed in suits and ties with their parents, talking about how their films are going to change the world. Right? That's the Beyond the Bricks project. Oral history projects, right? Where we have kids researching their own oral history and interviewing people in their neighborhoods and adding to archives and collecting data that can help shed light on stories that have been untold. And they learn how to do interviews. Kids say they want to be journalists. They write blogs and essays. They contribute these stories to publications like newspapers, right? Oops, I guess I'm going backwards now? Okay, there we go. So I'll end with a few slides. One of the things we think about, if you think about social injustice as a way of thinking about what social justice might mean, a social injustice is that race and class and geography predict academic achievement way too often. That's a social injustice. A social justice would mean every kid in America had a fair shot at an excellent education. Every kid in America was seen as able to achieve, right? Every kid in America, at the end of having a year of education with you, felt better about his or her ability to achieve their goals and to succeed in life and to be smart and to have that kind of identity. Right? That's the power that teachers have. Right? It's important. I think about it a lot because I've been an educator, but also because of where I grew up. I grew up in a community, in a neighborhood where people could have written us off and said, well, not that kid, right? That kid grew up on 107th Avenue. No chance he's going to be an Ivy League professor. But guess what? I'm an Ivy League professor. So I look at every kid that I've ever taught that same way. And more importantly, if I've done my job, they look at themselves that way. Right? That we have to believe in them. Right? I mean, this is not the career choice for people who don't believe that, for every kid. But if you do believe it, you are golden. Right? I mean, that you can't give a better gift than that to a kid. Is that kind of belief in themselves, right? That kind of identity. That's the kind of business we're in. The second part, and this is second, I have them in that order, right? That we know, first of all, that there's a much higher correlation between persistence and success than test scores and success. Right? How many people knew that? Right? So some of you, see, we don't teach that. That persistence is a much higher correlation to success than test scores. So if you're reshaping identities and people feel like they can make a difference and they become persistent, that's much better for their life outcome. Not that tests don't matter, but that matters, right? So the identity and then the academic development. Okay. I'm not going to have time to go through all these slides, but these are just other examples of work that we've had students do, PowerPoints that we've had them do, protests that they've organized and created, interviews and research that students have done. I was going to end with an example of a speech that this young girl delivered at a particular school that we work at in San Francisco, where all the kids give freedom and democracy speeches, and she's really articulate and powerful, and she's memorized the speech, and it's pretty amazing. She's talking about budget cuts. It's a school that was a failing school that has turned around. It's a school that not only has increased achievement, but they've decreased discipline problems, and they have less bullying on campus, and the students feel like they're a part of something. Right? And it's really about honoring that voice. But they're also developing academic skills. I guess the thing that I would say, to end, is, so why come up to Quinnipiac and have this conversation with teachers? Right? Why at 8 o'clock at night on a Tuesday, right? And a lot of other things we could be doing. I think it's because you represent the hope for people like Angel or people like me. That it's teachers who really believe that all kids are powerful, that actually helps those kids become powerful. Every day, or at least 3 days a week, I'm in a school somewhere in America that is defying the odds, where TV cameras never come. And it makes me upset because if somebody shot somebody on one of those campuses, the TV cameras will come. But that they're achieving excellence every day and that there's dignity and decency and love is not news, but it should be. Right? Every day, there are teachers across America that are doing what you dream about doing. And there are students that are happy to have them. We have to make that normal. We have to make that more commonplace. We have to share those stories. Talk about the things that we know matter. And in my short 21 years as an educator, these are the kinds of things that matter. Right? The content matters, but you have to make connections to kids. You have to understand the logic of their disinvestment. You have to understand what motivates them to achieve. You have to understand how to give affirmation and praise, how to connect academic content to what's happening in the community, how to make learning more engaging, how to have kids involved in real activities, understand the social context of learning, understand how letting kids, be on the platform and share with others reinforces their sense of themselves as worth something, and how reinforcing that sense of yourself as worth something makes all the difference. Makes all the difference. So before I turn over to questions, I just want to thank you again, right, for the decision you made at this point in your career to become teachers. I know that there are all sorts of challenges out there, right? All sorts of negativity. The paycheck comes at the end of the month and you're like, you got to be kidding me. Right? But it's important work. Right? I would not rather be doing anything else because it's work that's remunerative in more ways than one. And that's not just hokey, right? That's, as my kids say, that's real. That you can actually see yourself. So few people in the world have a chance to see themselves making a difference. And as teachers, you can. Right? And you get emails and letters, and you see kids that are living fundamentally different kinds of lives. Too seldom do we congratulate you for that endeavor. Right? But I congratulate you on the decisions that you've made. And I hope that you have wonderful and amazing careers for as long as you decide to teach. I hope that you find joy in demanding excellence from kids and watching them exceed their own expectations of themselves and defying the odds. And making true what my grandma said, that being poor does not mean that you deserve a poor education. Everyone deserves a great education. And that's why we need teachers who can give it to them. So I don't know necessarily what social justice means. And I haven't talked a lot about that. What I've talked about is helping kids to achieve their dreams, right? Eradicating some of the causes we know that lead to social injustice. And I think that that's doing enough, right? If you do that, then the social justice begins to take care of itself, right? Because maybe you were like me, you were that kid, right? And you're teaching and you think, I wanted somebody to believe in me. And that's an important part of what we do as teachers, is believe in students. But it's what we do as teachers that makes that belief possible as reality, right? And that we have to think about that it's not just the belief, but it's what the belief makes possible. So with that, I'll stop and I'll turn it over to questions. Thank you.
Just about 15 minutes,
Yeah,
so if
yeah.
you want to ask it.
Yeah. Yes.
We see a lot of tools that you're using, and how did you get the ability to use those tools? Because a lot of the schools that we're talking about don't have the academic or the money to be able to put together films to be able to do those kinds of things that you do.
Well, I mean, we some of it is, make movies off of the cell phones that kids have. I mean, the schools I work are pretty, they don't have a lot of resources. And we'll write grants. A lot of the things don't require a whole lot. I mean, we'll use the computer lab, the resources that are there, but very little of what we do requires a lot outside of what they have in the schools. the schools in Los Angeles that I worked were, in California is as impoverished a school system as I've seen. But we were able to do these projects. You know, we would get $50 or $60 flip cams. We would work that into the budget. The teachers would write small grants for $5,000 or $10,000. And my wife right now with the teachers in Harlem is writing these grants, and they're getting $500 or $600 for a classroom, and they're getting stuff to kind of turn it around. So I've never had the privilege of working in a school that had means. And so we just kind of make do. But a lot of this, you don't really need to have a lot of the fancy stuff. If you've got a couple of computers with the software that comes on the computer, you take a $69 flip cam and you plug it into that computer and you upload and you've got movies, right? And so we're just kind of using what we have. Yes?
What methods would you suggest are most important to focus on for kids who have learning disabilities, specifically those kids? Because a lot of this, I understand how it can relate to regular education kids, but what about specifically those kids with special needs? Well,
I mean, we've done a lot of this with the kids with special needs. I'm thinking specifically about a school. Well, I won't name the place where it is, but it's in the Northeast. And so we brought this work to that school. And they said, absolutely not can you do this with the special needs kids. And so the teacher brought it to the students and said, you know, is this work you'd like to do? And they did that work. I think that while there may be a certain percentage of students who cannot do this work, it's probably much smaller than what we would imagine that percentage of students to be. The real issue, I think, is one of differentiation. How do you differentiate curriculum that allows students to access it from multiple ability levels? And what percentage of the students are going to be able to do that kind of work? One of these schools in New Jersey, 75% of the students identified as special needs pass the state test. 91% of the students identified as general population pass the test. That was 3 out of 4 of the kids that were identified as special needs. Now, what they did was they scaffolded. They had, like, for instance, in language arts, and students are choosing reading, and we're trying to choose different kinds of reading depending on text complexity. We tried to find ways of, scheduling classes so there's more than one person in the classroom. That, you have a push-in model sometimes where so you cut down the class size and the students are working in smaller groups. That we're asking them to do less things, but to do those things at a higher quality. That we use students' ability to articulate orally to help develop their writing. That they're learning through more practical projects, but that it is the case that many of those students can too learn. And so many of the schools where I'm working, as many as half the students are identified as special needs. Right? That's not 2 or 3%, or it's not one class, it's like half of the students. And what we really find is there's a range. Some students are identified as special needs because they act up in class. And sometimes they act up in class because they're bored in class. But they've been tracked as special needs students, and you really find, okay, this student doesn't have trouble reading, they don't have trouble enumerating, but they have been classified because of their behavior. And you've got other kids who may have more mild versions of something that is, a disability around reading, but they're really sharp in math, and they're really sharp in other ways, and what they really need is some focused attention on reading. So if we think about it as a spectrum, each of those students is supposed to have an IEP, right? An individualized education plan that identifies some strengths, identifies some challenges, and this should also identify resources to help them with those challenges. And once that's in place, then I think we really have to think about what percentage of the general curriculum can these kids actually participate in. That leaves a much smaller subset, I think, at the end of the day that aren't able to do it. And then with those students, you do have to think about how might we make different kinds of assignments? How might we give the student more time for the test? The other students are going to write a 15-page paper. But I think in that process, we do everything we can to make sure every kid has the kind of resources they need. Look at students more as a spectrum as opposed to leveled. And I think that makes a huge difference, right? I think we get to a lot more of them, and we get a lot more of them what they need. Yes?
Okay, so you kept saying we, and you kept saying all different schools all over the country, New York, New Jersey, California. Obviously, you can't be in every place at once, so how do you go back and forth, and how do you deal with the different schools while you're in one place?
Well, the New York and New Jersey schools, some of the schools, the California schools, the model I worked on when I was in California is I was there every week in the schools. I brought the students to the campus, and we did programs for them in the summer and on the weekends. I worked with the teachers. Many of the teachers I actually taught when they were in pre-service and worked with them all the way through. The schools in New York and New Jersey, that's what I do now. So I'll spend 3 or 4 days a week in the schools. We'll go in the classrooms, we'll work with the teachers, work in their common planning time, we'll bring students to the university. The schools in California now, what we do is they're kind of sharing the work that they're doing. I mean, they're really solid, so they've got the kind of stuff that I used to do in-house, and they're continuing to do it. So when I say we because it's a collective effort, but the kind of work I try to do is spend time in the schools, talking with the teachers about the challenges they have, asking a lot of hard questions about the practice, helping them plan. We go into classrooms and we kind of figure out what's working. We share that and celebrate that, try to make sure we get the kind of resources that they need. Yes?
This is a more general question. I'm just curious about what you think is going into the new model of education where almost the entire country is going to be under the same standards, whether elementary school is going to be having it a little harder or whether the secondary education is going to be having it harder.
It depends on which one of those you talk to, right? They kind of are pointing the fingers both ways. I think that there are some challenges. The one thing I do like about where we're headed is that for the first time, we've said that this is not a standard of excellence that's only attainable by some, right? That it's something everyone can do. The downside is that we haven't really funded that or changed life in schools or given resources or made classrooms smaller or brought in technology, all the kinds of things you might need to make that kind of achievement possible. The changes I see is that schools are demanding a lot more from their kids. So we went through this last year. This is year 2 for us. So one of the schools, which was this school that now in 1 year went from a failing school to one of the top 5 turnaround schools in the state of New Jersey. 1 year. And they said last year, they didn't know what their results were going to be for graduation rates or any of those things. They just knew they were doing it differently. They said, you know what? All the kids are going to do a research report this year. And that was the first time that all the kids are going to do it. And they struggled through it and figuring out if all the kids are going to do it, we have to teach it differently. But that raising the level of demand for all students meant a huge change in the culture. And this was everyone from the students that were identified as AP to students that were identified as needing more help. Every student was doing the same kind of project. I think that it's going to, the other thing I see that's really changing is what a good classroom looks like. So now teachers are really concerned about interactive classrooms and having students talk to each other in science and in math and social studies. And so instead of having lecture work or individual work, how do we have collaborative projects? How do we have project-based learning? How is that facilitated by technology? Those are some of the things that I'm seeing that I think I've seen a real shift in maybe just a couple of years. Yes, sir.
Well, actually, my question kind of relates to his in terms of the politics of your industry and where you're trying to, you're messaging, you're kind of messaging a movement. And would you say 20% of the country is adopting it? 30%, 10%, 50%? Where's the other part? There could be another political industry party that's competing with your soundbite. And I was curious how you saw that come.
Well, I mean, in the hats I wear, you know, so as part of the presidency of NCTE, I would say it's like 70, 80%. Part of it is skewed by the people who ask me to come and to see what's going on, but you know, I've been in places where people wouldn't expect that to happen, where's the case. I mean, there's no offense to this particular state, but I'm just, as a positive example, Kentucky. So I went to Kentucky a few years ago and I spoke at the Kentucky Reading Association. People were like, oh, you know, Kentucky's real conservative education system. And it was like, you know, they were jumping up and ready to run out of the building, and we began to connect and build. Like I said, Indiana, and the schools, and when I continue to go back, and the kinds of things I see there are really transformational. Some of the places where we've had the most trouble has been in the central cities where people would expect it to be more progressive. But South Carolina, and I mean, I get just Louisiana, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. It's not even controversial in the places where I've been that teachers are saying we need to do this kind of work. And that's why I'm optimistic. I think that there's going to be, I think a real change is afoot. I think New York City is one of the hardest places where I do this work, where there's the most resistance. Chicago was another place where they're like, these kids can't do that, right? And I go down to Gary, Indiana, and they're doing it in Gary, Indiana, right, with the same kids. So I think it's a little counterintuitive, the places where there's been the most embrace of it, and the places where it's been the most difficult to do.
Well, we need to wrap up. I just want to thank you again, Ernest. I appreciate you coming out. So.